They call it Milcumbers, the Thousand Curves. A name like that makes it sound romantic, almost poetic. But there's nothing romantic about a road that feels more like a coiled serpent than pavement. It's a treacherous stretch of highway that twists through the mountains of Michoacan, Mexico, famous for making grown men nauseous and truck drivers pray under their breath. In the 1980s, GPS was science fiction and smartphones were still just someone's dream. All we had were creased road maps, coffee-stained and sun-faded, fluttering on the dashboard as we tried to make sense of the winding sprawl ahead. It was during one of those chaotic, analog summers when I rode the Milcumbers with my grandfather. I was barely a teenager, not yet dulled by life or old enough to understand real fear. Back then, I thought my abuelo was invincible, a tough-as-nails old man with hands like tree bark and eyes that had seen too much. He used to say the road was like a test from God. You pass it, you get the reward. You lose, you meet your judgment. I always thought he was joking. He wasn't. That particular evening had been perfect. We were heading back to Chilcota from Hidalgo, the sky painted in that kind of orange you only see in rural Mexico, the mountains etched in black silhouette, the air thick with the scent of pine and distant firewood smoke. My grandfather was in a good mood, talking about how the corn would be tall that year, how maybe it would be the season we finally bought a new truck. He loved that drive. Let's take the old road, he said. The air's better up there. I didn't protest. The old road, La Carretera Vieja, was dangerous, sure, but it was quiet, isolated. It curled through dense forest like a snake, a perfect route for a man trying to find peace away from the bustle. And back then, you didn't argue with your elders. Especially not El Abuelo. We began the climb just as the sun disappeared. Twilight spilled over the peaks and turned the world cold and purple. The road narrowed to a two-lane strip of cracked asphalt, hugged by steep cliffs on one side and dense pine forest on the other. As we ascended, the air turned crisp. The sound of cicadas faded, replaced by wind moaning through the trees. My grandfather drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on his leg, humming a tune I didn't recognize. I stared out the window, marveling at how bright the stars looked. In the city, you never really see them, not like that. They shimmered like glitter tossed across a dark canvas. I remember thinking how small I felt looking at that sky, how quiet the world seemed. Then, everything changed. It happened fast, too fast. My grandfather slammed on the brakes. Hard. The tires screeched against the crumbling road, and I jerked forward, caught by my seatbelt just in time. My head snapped up, expecting to see a deer, maybe another car, something in the road. But there was nothing. Nothing at all. "Que paso?" I asked, heart racing. He didn't answer right away. His eyes were fixed on the road ahead, wide and unblinking. His hands gripped the wheel tighter than I'd ever seen. Then, without a word, he threw the car into reverse. The tires spun on gravel as we backed up, wheels jerking to the side before he twisted the wheel and began a sharp three-point turn. "What's going on?" I asked again. His silence scared me more than anything else. Then I saw his face. The wrinkles around his eyes were tight. His jaw clenched. My grandfather, a man who'd once wrestled a wild boar, was terrified. That's when I started to panic. "Abuelo," I turned in my seat, looking through the back windshield. Nothing but darkness. No headlights, no animals. Just trees. Until something stepped out from them. At first, it was just a shape, a silhouette, black against black, but undeniably human. A man. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if he had all the time in the world. I remember the way he held something long in his hand, dragging it slightly along the asphalt. It glinted faintly in our taillights. I thought it was a shovel. It wasn't. My grandfather punched the gas. We sped down that twisting road like the devil himself was on our tail. The engine whined, tires screeched around corners, the car rocked with every curve. But the fear, that pure, primal fear, didn't come from being chased. It came from the look on my grandfather's face. It was a look that said he knew what was out there. He had seen it before. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. My voice had dried up. My hands clutched the seat, eyes glued to the side view mirror. But nothing followed us. No headlights. No movement. Just the sickening realization that something had almost happened, something terrible, and that we barely escaped it. We didn't speak until we hit the main highway, where lights returned and the mountains fell behind us. My grandfather pulled over at a rest stop and lit a cigarette with shaking hands. He didn't offer me one. That's how I knew it was serious. "Bandidos," he said finally. "They wait out there. Sometimes they set traps. Fake accidents. Sometimes they just wait for you to stop." But there was only one guy. I whispered. He looked at me. You only saw one. Years later, I'd learned the truth. The Millcumbers had a reputation, not just for its curves, but for the crimes buried along them. Robberies, carjackings, disappearances, whole families gone without a trace. Back then, the police didn't bother going up there at night. Too dangerous, too remote. Everyone knew. If you had to take that road, you did it during the day, and you never stopped. Some locals told stories about fake roadside shrines set up as traps, about people dressed as wounded travelers who'd wave you down until it was too late. One man even claimed his cousin had found a car upside down in a ditch, the driver still inside. But when he tried to help, someone pulled him into the trees. He barely escaped with his life. But that night with my grandfather, it stuck with me. Not because we saw a ghost or a monster, but because we didn't. Because we saw something human, something real, with a gun in its hands and bad intentions in its heart. What haunts me more than anything is the question that still goes unanswered. What would have happened if we hadn't stopped in time? It was supposed to be a routine drive, the kind where your brain goes on autopilot and your hands just steer out of habit. The kind of night where nothing should happen. But something did. It was late fall in rural Illinois. The trees were skeletal, stripped bare by the wind, and the sky looked like it had been painted over with ash. I was driving my old Chevy pickup, a creaking, rust-patched machine I kept alive with duct tape and prayer. The heater barely worked, and the cabin smelled like dust and spilled motor oil. It was my faithful ride, ugly but reliable, or so I thought. The road I was on had no name, at least none I ever bothered to remember. Just a winding strip of asphalt cutting through empty farmland and the kind of thick woods you didn't go into after dark. No streetlights, no other cars. Just me, my headlights, and the darkness pressing in from both sides. I was about 20 minutes from my parents' place. They lived in a sleepy town near the edge of the forest line, and I'd been making this trip for years. I could practically do it blindfolded. I wasn't speeding, just cruising, one elbow out the window, the other resting lazily on the wheel. That's when I saw it, movement. Something darted at the edge of my vision, off to the right. A flash of pale, tint fur. Reflex kicked in. I slammed the brakes hard, tires screeching as the truck fishtailed slightly before skidding to a stop. My heart thundered in my chest as I stared at the spot where I thought the deer would cross. Only, it never did. I waited, hands still trembling on the gear shift. The road ahead was empty, silent. I leaned forward, peering through the windshield, expecting a buck to leap out any second. But nothing came. Just the hum of my engine and the far-off chorus of crickets. At first, I figured maybe the deer had stopped just out of sight. No big deal, right? But something felt off. You know that feeling you get when you're being watched? When the back of your neck gets cold and your skin tightens around your bones. That's what I felt. Now, there's something you should know. The dome light in my truck had been busted for months. I always meant to fix it, but life kept getting in the way. So instead, I kept a flashlight on the passenger seat next to my old fold-out road map, a habit left over from the pre-GPS days. Still curious and uneasy, I grabbed the flashlight and rolled down the window. The cold night air rushed in, sharp and damp with the scent of leaves and distant with smoke. I shone the light into the woods where I'd seen the movement. Nothing. Just trees. Dead leaves. Darkness. I swept the beam back and forth. Then I saw them, eyes. 2 points of dull silver reflecting the beam back at me. That unmistakable animal stare. There you are, I whispered, feeling my breath fog in the air. But something was wrong. The eyes weren't moving. With a shiver of unease crawling down my spine, I leaned further out and adjusted the beam. That's when I saw it. Not a deer. Not anymore. It was the head of a deer. Just the head, no body. It had been severed, clean and deliberate, and was mounted upright on a jagged wooden stake. Whoever had done it had positioned it with care, its lifeless eyes facing the road like it was standing vigil. Its mouth hung open, stiff in death, blood crusted around the lips and antlers splintered as if they'd been smashed in anger. I stared. Froze. The world seemed to narrow down to just that image. That awful, grotesque thing, a crude warning or some kind of message, displayed so casually at the forest's edge. My first thought was, hunter's joke. A prank, maybe. A nasty one. But no. No one I knew hunted like that. And no hunter would leave behind a kill just to rot on a stake. That was wasteful, disrespectful, and disturbing in a way that twisted something deep in your gut. That was when the real fear set in. because someone had gone to a lot of trouble to make sure that head was seen, and I had just stopped right in front of it. I can't describe the panic that took over. I yanked the flashlight back inside and floored the gas pedal. The tires squealed on the asphalt, and for a brief second, I thought the truck wouldn't move, but then the engine roared and I lurched forward, headlights bouncing as I sped away like the devil was behind me. My hands were shaking on the wheel. I was flicking to the rearview mirror even though I didn't want to see what might be behind me. But part of me expected someone or something to come running from those trees. Nothing did. Still, I didn't slow down. Not until I saw the glow of my parents' porch light through the trees. Even then, I didn't say anything. How could I? What would I even say? Hey, Dad, someone's decorating the woods with decapitated wildlife. Right. I tried to forget about it. I really did. The logical side of my brain worked overtime. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe a poacher with a twisted sense of humor. Or a warning for other hunters, though I couldn't imagine what kind of message that would be. But the image haunted me. That head, the way it stared, as if it had been positioned not just to face the road, but to watch me specifically, like it had been waiting. A few weeks later, I casually mentioned it to a coworker who grew up in the area. I didn't give details, just said I'd seen something weird near the woods off that old country road. His face went pale. Was it a deer? He asked. I hesitated. Yeah. What? He swallowed. You're not the first. Turns out, there were whispers about that stretch of road. Rumors passed between old hunters and backwoods locals. Stories of animals found mutilated, of strange figures seen standing in the trees. People talked about the boundary, though no one could say what it was. Just that the forest past a certain point wasn't right. One guy supposedly found a line of skulls nailed to trees like some kind of macabre breadcrumb trail. Another said his hunting dogs refused to go past a certain tree line, whining and pulling on their leashes like they sensed something wrong. The cops never did much. There were no official reports, no evidence of any crime. Just dead animals, weird stories, and scared townsfolk. Still, every year, someone new would see something they couldn't explain. I never went back down that road again. Not alone. Not even in daylight. That deer's head wasn't just a sick joke. I'm sure of it. It was a warning. A marker. Or maybe, just maybe, it was bait. And that night, it almost worked. In January of 1992, a small East Texas town named Gilmer found itself at the center of one of the most disturbing and convoluted missing persons cases the state has ever known. At the heart of it was a bright, popular 17-year-old girl named Kelly Day Wilson, who vanished from a video rental store parking lot and was never seen again. Her story begins like so many others, a teenage girl with her whole life ahead of her, trying to settle into a new town, a new routine. Kelly had just moved from Natchitoches, Louisiana, to live with her mother and stepfather in Gilmer, Texas. With her sunny blonde curls, wide blue eyes, and love of bright jewelry, Kelly was a magnetic personality, the kind of girl who made friends quickly. She had dreams, a part-time job at the Northeast Texas video store, and a boyfriend named Chris Denton with whom she had a passionate on-again, off-again relationship. Everything seemed normal, until it wasn't. On the evening of January 5th, 1992, Kelly was scheduled to close up the video store, something she'd done many times before. Her manager, Joe Henry, helped shutter the front windows and finalize the till. At around 8:30 p.m., she locked up and walked into the crisp, quiet night to make the store's routine night deposit at a nearby bank. Security camera footage from the bank later confirmed that someone had driven up and deposited the money into the night drop box. But the camera angle was terrible, grainy, poorly lit, and angled just wrong. All it captured was an arm, extending from a car window to the drop. The face was completely obscured. Presumably, it was Kelly, but no one could say for sure. That was the last time anyone would ever see her. She never came home. When her mother woke the next morning and realized Kelly hadn't returned, panic set in. It was unlike her. Even if she and Chris had fought, even if she was upset, she always called, always checked in. By the time police were called, the clock had already begun to tick on those crucial first 48 hours. Her stepfather drove aimlessly through the town, retracing routes Kelly might have taken, checking diners, side streets, parking lots. That's when he found it. At 5 a.m., in the deserted lot of the video store, sat Kelly's car, a blue Chevy Corsica. The driver's side tire had been slashed. Her purse, wallet, and all personal belongings were still inside. Everything was untouched, except Kelly. She and her keys were gone. Just gone. At first, the town reacted with disbelief. Gilmer wasn't the kind of place where teenage girls vanished. It was quiet, conservative, the kind of town where the most dramatic thing to happen was a football loss or someone getting arrested for public drunkenness. But that disbelief soon curdled into something darker. The police began to dig. Her manager, Joe Henry, was the last person to see her. Naturally, suspicion fell on him. But he passed multiple polygraph tests and had verifiable alibis for the rest of the night. He was ruled out. Then there was Chris Denton, her boyfriend. They had been in the middle of one of their off periods, arguing more than usual, pushing each other's buttons. Friends said Chris had a temper and a motive. He became a prime suspect. But as the investigation unfolded, it became clear there was no hard evidence tying Chris to her disappearance. And while suspicion clung to him like smoke, the case refused to catch fire. For months, leads came in. Every single one led nowhere. It was like Kelly had simply stepped out of her car and vanished into thin air. Until things got even stranger. A new name surfaced. James Brown, the lead investigator on the case, began hearing whispers. Not from suspects or witnesses, but from children. Children who spoke of things no child should ever speak of. Horrific things. Tales of rituals, of masks and blood, of the devil hurting babies. The children claimed a satanic cult was operating in Gilmer, and that Kelly Wilson had been one of their victims. At first, these stories were dismissed as fantasy, the twisted fabrications of frightened young minds or manipulative adults. But then the accusations escalated. They named names. They said the cult included local law enforcement, even Sergeant James Brown himself. Suddenly, the investigator had become the investigated. In 1994, 2 years after Kelly's disappearance, the community was rocked by nearly 50 indictments across 10 people, including members of the Kerr family, a bizarre and deeply troubled clan living on the outskirts of town. The Kerrs were known for their isolation and peculiar behavior. But what investigators unearthed, or thought they unearthed, was deeply disturbing. Geneva Kerr, the matriarch, was alleged to have conducted daily rituals involving readings from the Satanic Bible, animal mutilations, and even human sacrifice. One witness, a former wife of the family, described being held as a slave for 10 years, used only as a breeder, her identification kept locked away by Geneva's son, Danny. The most chilling allegation? That Kelly Day Wilson had been taken by the Kerr family, tortured over the span of 9 days, and ritually sacrificed and cannibalized as a birthday gift for Geneva. Witnesses claimed local police were present for the ritual. They named James Brown as one of them. But the deeper you dug, the more things began to unravel. The Texas Attorney General eventually stepped in. Their findings? The entire case was based on fabricated testimony. Many of the child witnesses had been coerced, physically restrained, or threatened. Confessions were offered in exchange for life sentences to avoid the death penalty. No physical evidence ever surfaced. No body, no blood, no trace. Every single charge related to the alleged satanic cult was dismissed. What was left was a devastated community, a dozen ruined lives, and still, no Kelly. Years passed. In 2004, Chris Denton, Kelly's ex-boyfriend and former suspect, died of cancer. Rumors swirled of a deathbed confession, but his family called them malicious lies. As for Joe Henry, the manager, he faded into obscurity until he was arrested years later for possessing indecent images of children. But police emphasized he had never been seriously considered a suspect in Kelly's disappearance. Theories piled up. Satanic cults, small-town cover-ups, misogynistic violence, even supernatural whispers. But nothing ever brought anyone closer to the truth. There was no body, no confession, no closure, just an empty car in a cold parking lot. Some say Kelly ran away, but she left behind everything. Her purse, her money, her family. Others believe she was taken, that the truth was buried by those who wanted it forgotten. The trail is so twisted now that even seasoned investigators admit they don't know what to believe anymore. All that's left is a scar on a quiet town and a girl who deserved better. Kelly Day Wilson was declared legally dead in 2000. But for some, her ghost still lingers on that silent stretch of pavement outside Northeast Texas video. A haunting reminder that sometimes the darkest mysteries hide not in the shadows, but in the light of a town that chooses not to look. I want to make one thing clear up front. I'm not some tinfoil hat-wearing, ghost-hunting lunatic. I don't believe in orbs. I don't freak out over creaky floorboards or claim every cold breeze is a spirit from beyond. I'm a skeptic. Always have been. In fact, one of my favorite shows used to be Penn and Teller. BS. You know, the one where they dismantled every conspiracy theory and pseudoscientific claim under the sun? That was my vibe. If it couldn't be measured, observed, or explained, then it didn't exist. Or at least, that's what I believed. Until the night I took a wrong turn. It was spring 2017. The kind of spring that still bites at your skin after sunset, even when the days are starting to stretch longer. I was driving home from my buddy's place in Newport, Rhode Island. We'd had a chill evening, pizza, old video games, the kind of hangout we'd had since college. By 9 p.m., I was back on the road, cruising toward Narragansett. I'd made the drive probably 100 times. Back roads, main roads, you name it, I could have done it with my eyes closed. That familiarity, I think, is what made me careless. Instead of following my usual route, I decided to take a shortcut through a small town called Sandostown. The roads there snake through quiet, upscale neighborhoods where trees overhang like guardians and every street feels like it's holding its breath. It was darker than I expected, no streetlights, no other cars. Just me. And that was fine. Until it wasn't. I was fiddling with the radio, trying to find a decent station that wasn't static or generic pop. Somewhere between scanning frequencies and checking my phone for directions, I took a wrong turn. I remember the street sign, Lancaster Way, even though I never saw it again after that night. It led into a cul-de-sac. The kind of suburban dead end where every house looks identical. Driveways lined with tidy hedges. No movement. No porch lights. Just the eerie hush of people tucked away in perfect little lives behind closed doors. I muttered a curse under my breath and started to turn around. The street was narrow, so I had to do a slow three-point turn. My headlights cut across the empty houses and bounced off a few parked cars. I was about to put the truck in drive when I saw another car pulling into the cul-de-sac behind me. Where it came from, I have no idea. It was sudden, silent. I hit the brakes out of instinct, startled by the sudden appearance. The car rolled toward me slowly, its headlights blinding and unwavering. I threw my hands up in apology, mouthing "my bad," and gestured that I was just turning around. But the car didn't react. No honk. No flash of lights. No movement at all. Just stillness. At first, I was just embarrassed. I probably looked like an idiot sitting there blocking the way. I glanced back at the car. That's when I noticed it wasn't just any car. It was old. Not 80s or 90s old. I'm talking 1930s vintage. It looked like something straight out of a noir film. A sleek black Buick Special, complete with chrome bumpers, wide fenders, and those distinctive white wall tires. But it wasn't rusty or dusty like you'd expect an antique to be. No, this thing was immaculate. Like it had just rolled off the line yesterday. Polished, gleaming, pristine. I stared, kind of impressed, honestly. I even gave a thumbs up, pointing to the hood. Still no reaction. But the driver, he was just sitting there. That's when things got weird. I squinted past the glare of the headlights, trying to make out his face. At first, all I could see was the outline of a man behind the wheel. But the longer I looked, the more detail emerged. His skin was pale, not just white, but waxen, like a mannequin left out in the sun. His hair was perfectly slicked back, jet black and shiny. He wore a dark suit, old-fashioned, the kind with shoulder pads and a wide lapel. And he was smiling. Not a grin, not a friendly smirk. A fixed, unnatural smile. Lips curled too high, teeth too perfect. It reminded me of those ventriloquist dummies. The kind that make your skin crawl no matter how old you are. I turned back to my own dashboard, suddenly desperate to leave. I twisted the key in the ignition. Click. Nothing. Again. Click. Click. Still nothing. No engine. No lights. Not even the flicker of the dome light. My truck had died. My heartbeat kicked into overdrive. This wasn't some beater, okay, maybe it was, but it had never just died on me like this before. I reached for my phone, but it had no signal. The signal bar was just gone. No service. Not even 1X. I looked back. The Buick was still there. So was the driver. Still smiling. Still not moving. But I could hear something now. A faint sound. I rolled down the window to listen. It was music. Creepy, warbling music. Like a record player that had been sitting in a dusty attic for half a century. Scratchy and distant, violins and piano playing some mournful, off-key waltz. The sound was coming from the Buick. My throat was dry. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. Then, out of nowhere, my truck's radio crackled to life. And it was playing the same song. Exactly the same. No lyrics. Just that haunting, broken melody echoing through my speakers. I wanted to run. Get out and sprint into the night, even if I didn't know where I was. But I couldn't move. I was locked in place, eyes on the other car, chest rising and falling like I'd just run a marathon. Then, the Buick's headlights cut out. Darkness swallowed the street. At the exact same time, my radio went silent. The light on my dash went dead again. And for a few heartbeats, everything was still. I turned the key. This time, the engine roared to life like it had never stalled at all. My headlights blinked on. The Buick was gone. Not pulling away. Not turning a corner. Not receding in the distance. Just gone. No sound. No taillights. No tire marks. Like it had never been there. I screamed. Not out of fear, but confusion. Rage. A kind of primal panic that clawed up from inside me. I tore out of that cul-de-sac like hell was behind me. And maybe it was. For weeks, I couldn't let it go. I retraced my route. I scoured Google Maps trying to find Lancaster Way again. It never showed up. I talked to locals. No one had ever heard of it. I even started researching vintage car clubs in the area, thinking maybe someone owned a 1937 Buick Special. I found one for sale in Middleton. The seller's nephew sent me pictures. The car was a rusted wreck, cracked leather seats, missing parts, but it looked exactly like the one I saw. I asked where his uncle had gotten it. Police auction, he said. Years ago. Dad died before he could fix it up. The Buick hadn't been driven in decades. People tell me it was stress. A hallucination. Maybe I dozed off at the wheel for a second and imagined it all. But the song that played through my dead truck's radio, that wasn't a dream. I never found that cul-de-sac again. And I never heard that song again. But sometimes, when I'm driving late at night and the road is empty, I check the rearview mirror, and I brace myself for those headlights. The ones that never seem to make a sound. The ones that belong to a car that shouldn't exist. They say the first 48 hours are the most critical in a missing persons case. After that, the trail goes cold, evidence disappears, memories blur, and the silence begins to bury the truth. For Audrey Herron, the clock started ticking at exactly 11 p.m. on the night of August 29, 2002. And no one has ever found the end of that ticking. That Thursday night in Catskill, New York, was humid and fog-draped, with rain tapping lightly on the roof of the Columbia Green long-term health care facility. Audrey, a 31-year-old nurse, had just finished her shift, clocking out after a long day of caring for elderly patients. Despite the exhaustion, she was in high spirits. She had called home around 9:30 p.m. to share some good news. She'd just received a raise. Her husband, Jeff, congratulated her over the phone. It was a hopeful moment for them. Audrey's income helped provide for their blended family, 2 daughters and a newborn son. The extra money meant stability, progress, a step closer to a better life. She promised to be home soon. No one ever heard from her again. At 11 p.m., Audrey exited the building, her nursing scrubs dampened by the light drizzle, and made her way across the nearly empty parking lot to her 1994 Jeep Grand Cherokee. It was a routine she'd performed countless times. The drive from the nursing home in Jefferson Heights to her home in Freehold was about 15 miles, a quick 20-minute commute on Route 23. A coworker who left shortly after Audrey said they saw her headlights behind them for the first few miles, then lost sight of her through the curtain of fog and rain. No one thought much of it. Until the next morning. Jeff Herron awoke around 6 a.m. the next day to an empty bed. He wasn't immediately alarmed. Nurses often got held back by emergencies, a patient fall, an unexpected medication delay. Audrey had stayed late before, but when he called the nursing home to ask if she was still working, they told him she'd left right on time, at 11 p.m. the night before. She never made it home. He tried calling friends and family. No one had seen or heard from her. By 10 a.m., the worry turned to fear, and a missing person report was filed. The officer who took the call happened to be Audrey's stepmother, a former policewoman. The investigation began immediately. But the search for Audrey wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be short, and it wouldn't end. The first clues, or rather, the lack of them, were deeply unsettling. Despite a massive search effort involving local police, volunteers, cadaver dogs, and even helicopters, Audrey's Jeep was never found. No debris, no tire marks, no signs of a crash. She and her vehicle had disappeared completely. The only camera footage available came from a nearby convenience store, Cumberland Farms. It showed a vehicle matching Audrey's Jeep leaving the parking lot of the nursing facility, turning west onto Route 23B, right around the time she would have left. But the footage was grainy, barely legible. They couldn't confirm it was her. Then came the questions. If Audrey had gotten into an accident, why wasn't her Jeep found? Why hadn't someone called it in? If she had run away, why leave behind her purse, found at home, and her 2 daughters? Her car phone couldn't be tracked. It had either died, been turned off, or disconnected entirely. Investigators couldn't ping it, not even once. Police canvassed the entire stretch of her drive home, particularly areas near bodies of water, steep embankments, and abandoned roads. Nothing. Not a tire track. Not a scrap of clothing. It was like the night had swallowed her whole. Suspicions began to circle. The first to fall under scrutiny was Jeff Herron, her husband. Some of Audrey's friends, particularly her close friend Karina, found his behavior odd. He hadn't immediately called to check in when she didn't come home. He didn't sound worried in his voicemails. He sounded low, Karina would later recall. Almost like he was resigned. Not frantic, not anxious, just sad. It didn't sit right with her, especially considering what Audrey had confided in her. Audrey had shared that Jeff could be controlling, checking up on her frequently, calling multiple times if she was out with friends or at work. And yet, the night she disappeared, he didn't call once during that 7-hour stretch from when she left work to the time he finally noticed her absence. Karina and others found it difficult to reconcile the two versions of Jeff, the controlling partner and the detached husband who seemed too calm too soon. But suspicion is not evidence. And when police searched their home 3 separate times, they found nothing. Jeff agreed to a polygraph, but his father, under legal advice, pulled him out before it could be completed. He later cited the unreliability of lie detector tests and the risk of false positives. Years later, Audrey's eldest daughter from a previous marriage, Sancha, would publicly defend Jeff. He was a good stepfather, she said. Strict sometimes, but not cruel. The media made him out to be something he wasn't. Still, the questions lingered. As the years passed, other theories emerged, darker ones. One theory involved a silent business partner in Jeff's family's golf course, a Russian national who was said to have mafia connections. Audrey had apparently overheard an argument between him and some other men on the property. She'd mentioned it to Jeff, how it made her uneasy, how they all went quiet when she walked by. Was it possible she'd stumbled into something she wasn't supposed to hear? Was her disappearance a warning? The theory was whispered about, but never officially pursued. Too speculative, too far-fetched. And still, no Jeep, no Audrey. Then came a new lead in 2016. A woman came forward claiming her brother, a man with a long history of indecent assault and attempted kidnapping, had developed an obsession with Audrey while picking up their mother from the nursing home. She believed he had followed Audrey, maybe even hidden in the back of her Jeep. A terrifying possibility, one made more plausible by a detail from Audrey's friends. The rear doors of her Jeep didn't lock properly. If someone had waited, hidden, crouched in the darkness, it explained how she could vanish without a struggle, without a trace. Police took the tip seriously. They drained a pond near the man's home in Catskill, brought in dogs, searched the surrounding woods. But like every other lead, it went cold. Over the years, there have been hundreds of reported sightings in neighboring states, in distant cities. All unconfirmed, all dead ends. Police officially ruled out accidental disappearance. She hadn't run away. She hadn't crashed. It was foul play. But by who? And how? Remains a mystery that has defied resolution for over 2 decades. What haunts people the most is the absence of evidence, of motive, of closure. Her Jeep never resurfaced. Her body was never found. It's as if the road itself, that rain-slick stretch of Route 23, opened its jaws and swallowed her whole. Audrey Herron was a nurse, a mother, a daughter, a woman who had just gotten a raise and was coming home to share the joy with her family. and then she vanished into the night. And no one knows why. Not her husband, not her friends, not the police, not even the road. On the surface, Patrick Carnes lived a quiet life. A retired World War II veteran, 86 years old, well into his golden years. He lived in Reno, Nevada, a city known more for casinos and slot machines than for mysteries. Despite his age, Patrick was no frail man fading away in a recliner. He was sharp, alert, and independent. He walked his dog Lucky every day, took care of himself, still drove his green Subaru Forester across state lines when the mood struck. He had a love for the open road, especially with Lucky by his side. But in April 2011, Patrick Carnes got into his car one last time, and he never came back. He'd been in Toledo, Ohio, visiting family. A long trip from Reno, but not unusual for Patrick. He was self-reliant, used to long drives, and as a veteran, the idea of traversing thousands of miles alone didn't intimidate him. He was on the return leg of his journey when the first known encounter occurred, a seemingly innocent interaction that would become far more chilling in hindsight. It was April 13th, around 9 p.m., near the small town of Wells, Nevada, along Interstate 80. A Nevada Highway Patrol officer pulled Patrick over for an improper lane change. It was dark, the highway mostly deserted, and Patrick had apparently failed to signal while passing a semi-truck. Dashcam footage shows a brief exchange. The officer, polite and professional, noted that Patrick was trailing closely behind a large truck. Patrick explained that he was just following the truck ahead of him. There was no tension, no reason for suspicion. Patrick appeared lucid, respectful, and sober. He promised not to drive through the night anymore, and said he'd be stopping soon to rest. Lucky wagged his tail in the back seat, panting happily. The officer let him go with a warning. It would be the last confirmed sighting of Patrick Carnes. The next morning, around 5:45 a.m., a green Subaru Forester was discovered abandoned near Winnemucca, more than 150 miles west of Wells. It was parked awkwardly off the side of the interstate, partially stuck in sagebrush, facing the wrong direction, toward oncoming traffic. The ignition was off. The doors were closed. The vehicle wasn't damaged, and the tank still had fuel. Inside were Patrick's personal belongings. Everything except Patrick. And Lucky. The strangest detail? A single set of footprints led away from the car. No canine tracks. No sign of Lucky's paws in the dirt. It was as if Patrick had left the car alone, in the dark, and simply walked away into the desert. Why would an 86-year-old man, a combat vet, do that? The search began immediately. Law enforcement scoured the area, searching desert scrub and roadside ditches. Helicopters flew overhead. Dogs were brought in. But Patrick was gone. Just like that. No blood. No struggle. No signs of a robbery. Nothing to suggest an attack. The only clue was a folded map of highway rest stops, found in the car. It traced his route from Ohio to Nevada. But Winnemucca wasn't on the route, and Patrick had no known reason to be there. So how, and more importantly, why? Did he end up 150 miles off his course, his car facing the wrong direction, his dog missing, his footprints leading nowhere? A few days later, a witness reported seeing a dog resembling Lucky near the Pumpernickel Valley exit, not far from where the Subaru had been found. Volunteers searched for days, hoping to find the dog, hoping it might lead them to Patrick. But Lucky was never found. Neither was Patrick. And then, the coincidences began. Because this wasn't the first time a car had been found abandoned near that same exit. In 2006, 5 years earlier, a woman named Judith Casita, aged 62, disappeared under eerily similar circumstances. She'd been last seen leaving her home in Reno on Valentine's Day, driving her 1991 Mazda pickup. Her truck was found 2 weeks later, in the same spot where Patrick's would be found. Working condition. No signs of a struggle. No Judith. The only clue left behind was a note, a short message about feeling lost, overwhelmed. Some interpreted it as a suicide note. But without a body, it was nothing but speculation. 2 disappearances. 2 vehicles. Same location. Same result. Gone. Locals began whispering. Was it the work of a serial killer? A predator who stalked lonely highways, waiting for travelers to stop? Truckers passing through the area reported uneasy feelings near the Pumpernickel Valley, describing it as a dead zone, a stretch of road that felt wrong even in broad daylight. And there were more cases, people who had gone missing along that same desolate stretch of I-80. The Christians, Grant Madsen, and others who never made it to their destinations. Some were later found alive, others were not found at all. No official link was made, but the coincidences piled up like sand in a desert windstorm. One theory suggested Patrick had simply wandered off, that something had disoriented him, fatigue, dehydration, a sudden health crisis. Maybe Lucky had jumped out and Patrick followed. But search crews never found tracks for Lucky. No torn leash, no fur, no sign of an injured dog, and Patrick's footprints just stopped, as if he'd been lifted off the ground. Another theory pointed to foul play. Remember Patrick's words to the highway patrol officer? "I'm just following that truck ahead of me." Who was driving that truck? No license plate was recorded. No description. No record of who the driver was. But investigators believe Patrick may have met someone at a rest stop or on the road, someone he trusted, someone who convinced him to deviate from his planned route. Some speculate that Patrick got into another vehicle after parking the Subaru. That would explain why he walked away voluntarily, why the dog didn't follow, but it doesn't explain why nothing else was ever found. Patrick Carnes was declared legally deceased in 2014, 3 years after his disappearance. But his family never got closure. His daughter, friends, and former military colleagues still speak about him with hope, or, at the very least, a deep yearning for answers. How does a man, an old soldier who survived war, raised a family, kept his independence well into his 80s, vanish without a trace on an open highway? No wreck, no body, no dog, just a car facing the wrong way, and a map with no destination. Some people say the desert keeps its secrets. Some believe that certain stretches of highway are cursed, places where time folds, where realities shift, where people disappear into thin air. Whether it's the work of a killer, an unsolved pattern of coincidences, or something more unexplainable, no one knows for sure. But next time you're driving across the Nevada desert, especially late at night, pay attention to your surroundings. Watch who's behind you. And if you see a green Subaru abandoned on the side of the road, maybe just keep driving, because some mysteries are better left unsolved.